"Till death do us part," a vow meant to last a lifetime. A promise whispered under the golden glow of candlelight 10 years ago. But on this night, death didn't wait for old age. The hotel staff at Azure Grand Resort, a 5-star paradise on the outskirts of Johannesburg, thought it was just another routine evening. The pool area was quiet, save for the occasional chatter of guests enjoying the warm night air. The sky was clear, the moon casting silver streaks across the water. Then the screams shattered the silence. A woman, a hotel guest, stood frozen at the pool's edge, her hand clamped over her mouth. The wine glass in her other hand slipped, shattering against the tiles. Floating in the water, side by side, were the bodies of Michael and Adana Okafor. The couple's wedding rings still glistened under the pool lights. Their eyes were wide open, their faces twisted in expressions of terror. When the police arrived, it was first assumed to be an accidental drowning. But then Detective Jonah Mbeki, a seasoned investigator with an eye for details, noticed something off. The water. The deep end of the pool had an unnatural stillness, no ripples, no signs of struggle. As if the bodies had been placed there, after death. And then, just as the forensic team began their work, the hotel's CCTV footage revealed something truly disturbing. 10 years earlier, Michael and Adana Okafor were the kind of couple that made people believe in fairy tales. Michael was an ambitious entrepreneur, running a thriving logistics company. Adana was a celebrated chef, her restaurant in Lagos drawing high-profile guests from across the country. They met at a university event. Michael, the confident go-getter, Adana, the free-spirited artist. Their love was electric, the kind that made even strangers smile. When they married, the ceremony was grand. Hundreds attended, but only one guest remained in their minds. David Omondi, Michael's childhood friend, his best man, and the man who had disappeared from their lives soon after the wedding. No one knew why. No one questioned it. Now, a decade later, the Okafors had planned the perfect getaway to celebrate their 10th anniversary. A week-long stay at the luxurious Azure Grand Resort. It was meant to be a reunion of their love, a reminder of how far they had come. But instead, it became their grave. The first sign that something wasn't right came the moment they checked in. The concierge, a woman in her 50s with deep-set eyes, hesitated as she handed them their key. "Are you sure about this room?" she asked. "Why wouldn't we be?" Michael chuckled, unaware of the chill in her voice. That night, Adana couldn't sleep. She woke Michael at 2:47 a.m., saying she had heard whispers in the hallway. "It's probably the wind," Michael murmured, pulling her close. She tried to believe him. But by the next night, when the couple attended a private dinner at the hotel's poolside lounge, the whispers turned into something much worse. Adana noticed him first. A man standing beyond the poolside, half hidden in the shadows. She nearly dropped her glass. Her grip on the stem tightened. Her pulse quickened. That face, she knew it. Her body stiffened. "Michael," she whispered. Michael turned, but by the time he looked, the man was gone. Adana's hands trembled slightly as she set her wine down. "That man. I know him." Michael frowned. "Who?" She swallowed hard. "David." Michael stared at her. "That's not possible." She knew he was right. It wasn't possible. Because David Omondi had been dead for 10 years. Michael forced a laugh, shaking his head. "Adana, you're tired. Maybe the wine?" "No," she interrupted, her voice firm. "I saw him." Michael reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "David is gone." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "He's not here." Adana wanted to believe him. But deep in her gut, she knew what she saw. And that night, the whispers returned. Except this time they weren't coming from the hallway. They were coming from the bathroom. Adana sat up in bed, her breath catching in her throat. The shower was off, the lights were dimmed, yet she could hear it. A low, distorted murmur. Slowly, she swung her legs over the edge of the bed. "Michael?" she whispered. No response. She tiptoed toward the bathroom door, the whispers growing louder. Then, the shower turned on by itself. A scream lodged in her throat. She reached for the door handle with a shaking hand. And then, in the mirror's reflection, a figure stood behind her. Adana's breath hitched in her throat. The figure in the mirror wasn't Michael. It wasn't a shadow. It was a man standing directly behind her. His face was partially obscured by the fog on the glass, but she could see his eyes, hollow, dark, and watching her. A cold, damp hand suddenly pressed against her shoulder. She screamed. Her body jerked as she spun around, arms flailing, but no one was there. The bathroom was empty. The shower was still running, hot steam curling against the ceiling. The whispering had stopped. Adana's hands trembled as she reached for the knob, shutting off the water. The room fell into dead silence, save for her ragged breathing. "Michael," she whispered, stepping out of the bathroom. "Michael, wake up." He stirred under the sheets, groggy. "What is it?" Adana's voice shook. There was someone in the bathroom. Michael sat up slowly, rubbing his face. "What are you talking about?" "I saw him," she said. "I felt him." Michael frowned, now fully awake. "Adana, you're scaring me." Her arms wrapped around herself. "Something isn't right. Ever since we got here I've been hearing things. Seeing things." Michael sighed, swinging his legs off the bed. He placed his hands on her shoulders, his warmth grounding her. "There's no one else here, babe." His voice was gentle, reassuring. "It's a big hotel, old pipes, weird echoes. Maybe the stress is getting to you." Adana wanted to believe him. But deep down she knew. She knew what she had seen. And worse, she knew who it was. The next morning the unease hadn't left her. She went down to the hotel lobby alone, hoping some fresh air and coffee would clear her mind. But as she passed the reception desk, she noticed something odd. A photo hung on the wall behind the concierge's desk. It was a group picture. Employees of the hotel, smiling, standing shoulder to shoulder. Her gaze froze. There, in the back row, standing slightly off-center, was David. Adana's stomach twisted. It couldn't be. Slowly, she stepped closer, her fingers brushing the glass. The image wasn't old, maybe a year or two at most. A cold wave of nausea hit her. David had been dead for 10 years. So why was he in this picture? She turned to the concierge, her voice barely steady. "Excuse me, the man in the back row, who is he?" The concierge glanced up. "Oh, that's David." Adana's entire body stiffened. The woman continued casually. "He worked here for a while. Good man. Quiet." Adana's pulse roared in her ears. "Worked? Past tense?" The concierge nodded, lowering her voice slightly. "He left about 6 months ago. Never said goodbye. Just vanished." Adana took a shaky step back. The blood in her veins turned to ice. It didn't make sense. It wasn't possible. David had died the night of their wedding. She had seen him drown. Hadn't she? Adana stumbled back to the room, heart hammering in her chest. When she opened the door, Michael was standing by the window, staring outside. "Michael," she started, but then she noticed his posture. His shoulders were tense, his hands balled into fists. Something was wrong. She stepped closer. "Michael?" He turned to face her and she froze. There were wet footprints leading from the bathroom, straight to where he stood. Her stomach twisted into a knot. "Michael, why are your feet wet?" Michael didn't answer immediately. He just stared at her. Then, in a voice too low, too empty, he whispered, "I don't remember getting out of bed." The silence between them grew heavy. Adana's chest rose and fell rapidly. She forced herself to swallow the lump in her throat. "You're scaring me." Michael blinked as if trying to process his own words. He shook his head, taking a step back. "Maybe I just went to the bathroom half asleep." Adana glanced toward the bathroom door. The light was off. The floor was dry. The air was still. Yet the footprints were fresh. And there was one thing that made her blood run cold. The footprints weren't leading from the bathroom. They were leading toward it. Something had walked in. Her skin crawled with an unexplainable fear. Then, a knock at the door. Michael and Adana both jumped. They turned toward the entrance. The knock came again. Slow. Rhythmic. Michael stepped forward cautiously. "Room service?" They hadn't ordered anything. Another knock. Adana's breath hitched. "Don't open it." Michael hesitated, then peered through the peephole. Adana watched as his entire body went rigid. His breath hitched. His shoulders tensed. "What is it?" she whispered. Michael didn't answer. Instead, his hands began to shake. Slowly he turned the lock. "Michael, no." Adana grabbed his arm, but it was too late. The door swung open. The hallway was empty. No one was there. But at their feet, a single wet footprint. And then, a voice. Hoarse. Familiar. From inside the room. "You shouldn't have come back." Adana whipped around. Her entire body froze. Standing in the dim light of the room, staring straight at her, was David. Dripping wet. Smiling. Adana's breath caught in her throat. David stood in the dim glow of the hotel room, dripping wet, his dark eyes fixed on her. Water pooled at his feet, seeping into the plush carpet, but his chest didn't rise or fall. He wasn't breathing. Michael stood frozen beside her. His fingers twitched at his sides, his face deathly pale. Adana's voice barely escaped. David? David smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't human. You look surprised, he murmured. His voice was hoarse, raw, like someone who had spent years screaming underwater. Michael took an instinctive step back. This isn't real, he muttered, shaking his head. This is some kind of sick joke. David tilted his head. A single drop of water fell from his chin, hitting the carpet with an unnaturally loud plop. A joke? His voice was soft, almost amused. Is that what you thought when you left me in the water? Michael flinched. Adana's stomach lurched. Michael had always refused to talk about that night. The night David had disappeared. Adana stepped forward, her pulse hammering in her ears. We thought you were dead. David's expression didn't change. Did you? His gaze flicked to Michael. Or did you just hope I was? Michael's fists clenched. David, we didn't what? David's voice turned sharp, cracking like ice. Didn't push me? Didn't watch me sink? A single breath of silence stretched between them. Then David smiled wider. Let me remind you. Suddenly the lights flickered, then cut out. The room plunged into darkness. The air grew thick and humid, like the inside of a drowning man's lungs. Then, drip, drip, drip. Adana's body tensed. The sound was everywhere, as if the entire room had been submerged in unseen water. A slow, wet breath brushed against her ear. You should have drowned too, Adana, she screamed. The lights flashed back on, and David was gone. Adana's chest rose and fell in sharp gasps. Michael spun around, his eyes wild. Where did he go? The room was empty except for the water. A dark puddle stained the carpet where David had stood, the moisture spreading outward, like fingers creeping toward them. Then the television, untouched on the dresser, flickered on by itself. A loud static hiss filled the room. And then, a grainy video began playing. Adana stopped breathing. It was them. A recording from 10 years ago. The night of their wedding. On the screen, she and Michael stood on a rocky beach, still in their wedding attire. She remembered this moment. They had sneaked away from the reception to meet David, away from the music, away from the speeches. Only this time she saw something she had never seen before. Michael's hand. On the screen, his fingers gripped David's collar. David was struggling. Fighting. Michael pushed. David stumbled backward. His foot slipped on the slick rocks. The dark waves swallowed him whole. Adana clutched her head. No, she whispered. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. She had blocked it out. The memory had been buried deep, distorted, twisted into a different version of events. Michael had told her David had fallen. But the footage didn't lie. Michael had pushed him. Her gaze snapped to her husband. You lied to me. Michael's face was ghostly pale. His hands trembled. He was trying to ruin us, Adana. He was our friend, she cut in, her voice shaking. Michael's breathing turned ragged. The television screen suddenly glitched. The image distorted. David's face reappeared. But this time he was looking directly at them. His lips parted and he spoke. Time to finish what you started. The screen went black. A loud, wet splash echoed from the bathroom. The puddle on the carpet had spread. The bathroom door, which had been open, was now closed. A single trail of wet footprints led into it. Adana's body locked up. Something was waiting for them inside. Michael reached for her wrist. We have to go. But the moment he spoke, the bathroom door handle turned. And a voice, deep, bubbling, wet, spoke from behind it. I never left. The bathroom door handle turned slowly, the deliberate, unsettling kind of movement that made Adana's skin prickle with primal fear. She didn't move. Michael didn't breathe. Then click. The door unlocked by itself. A cold gust of air slithered out, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of damp earth, mildew, and salt water. Adana's entire body tensed. Nothing about this was possible. But it was happening. Michael snapped out of his paralysis first. He lunged for Adana's wrist, yanking her backward. We have to go. Now. But before they could move, the door creaked open. Just an inch. Enough to see the darkness inside. Enough to hear the water dripping. Enough to see the reflection in the mirror. Adana's breath hitched. The bathroom mirror wasn't reflecting the room. It was reflecting the ocean. Not just any ocean, that night. The rocky beach. The waves crashing violently. And in the center of it, David. Standing in the water, waist deep, staring back at them. His suit was tattered, his skin pale and bloated, his lips tinged blue. But his eyes were alive. Burning with something beyond death. Michael took a step back. His voice cracked. "David, please?" David didn't move. Then, ever so slowly, he raised his arm. His fingertips pressed against the inside of the mirror as if it were glass separating him from their world. And then he knocked. Once. Twice. The sound wasn't normal. It wasn't flesh against glass. It was wet. Hollow. Like waterlogged bones knocking against wood. Michael lost it. He grabbed Adana's arm and yanked her toward the door. "We're leaving. Now." But just as they turned, the mirror shattered. A hand shot out from the glass. It wasn't human anymore. It was bloated, pale, the nails torn away, the skin wrinkled like it had spent too long underwater. It latched onto Michael's wrist. And pulled. Michael let out a strangled scream as his body was yanked toward the broken mirror. His feet scrambled against the wet floor, slipping, his free hand clawing at the carpet. Adana's instinct took over. She grabbed his other arm. "Pull back. No. No, 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 no," she screamed, her fingers digging into his flesh. Michael's eyes were wide with terror. His lips trembled. "Adana?" The bathroom began to flood. Water poured from the mirror as if a dam had broken, soaking the floor, rising around their ankles, their knees. The hand dragging Michael didn't stop. Adana could see David now, pulling him from the other side. His head tilted, not with anger but something worse. Satisfaction. Michael thrashed. "Don't let go." The water reached their waists. It was so cold. Adana's muscles burned from pulling. Her grip was slipping, he was slipping. Then, in a single horrifying moment, David opened his mouth. The sound that came out was not human. It was the ocean itself. A choked, drowning gurgle. The water surged higher. Michael's grip loosened. Adana let out a desperate sob as his fingers slid from hers. And then he was gone. Pulled into the mirror. The water immediately drained from the floor, disappearing as if it had never been there. The mirror? Whole again. Nothing but her own horrified reflection staring back. Adana fell to her knees, her chest heaving. It was silent. Too silent. Her hands trembled as she reached forward, touched the mirror. Nothing happened. Just her reflection. Michael was gone. A strangled sob escaped her throat. Then, the television crackled. Her head jerked up. The screen flickered to life. And there, on the screen, Michael. Underwater. His arms floating, his eyes wide open in silent terror. Adana clamped her hand over her mouth. "No?" He tried to scream but no sound came out. Only bubbles. Then, David appeared behind him. He leaned in close. His mouth moved. Adana watched in horror as the subtitles appeared on the screen. "It's your turn next." The TV shut off. A deafening silence filled the room. Adana's whole body went cold. Then from the bathroom, a single drip of water. The hotel room was silent. Adana sat on the soaked carpet, her fingers trembling as she stared at the blank television screen. The image of Michael drowning was burned into her mind. His wide, panicked eyes. His open mouth, screaming in silence. David had taken him. And now it was her turn. A single drop of water fell from the bathroom ceiling. Plop. She jerked her head up. The mirror was fogging over again. Slowly, almost hesitantly, words appeared on the glass. Not written by a hand. They formed on their own, like breath on cold glass. 3 words. "Come to me." Adana's pulse pounded. No, she wasn't going in there. She wasn't going near that mirror. She pushed herself to her feet, stumbling toward the hotel door. Her hands clawed at the lock, fingers trembling. Click. The lock wouldn't budge. Adana's breath came in ragged gasps. She yanked on the handle, it was jammed. No, no, no. She turned toward the window. Maybe she could climb down? Bam. She froze. The bathroom door slammed shut. Then the television flickered back on. Adana whipped around. The screen was dark. But there was a reflection on it. Someone standing behind her. A man. Dripping wet. Michael. A shaking breath left her lips. She turned slowly. But he wasn't there. Her stomach twisted. Then behind her the voice whispered. "Why are you running?" She spun and this time he was there. Michael. Standing by the bathroom door. His skin was pale and waterlogged. His lips were slightly parted, blue from the cold. His eyes, they weren't his anymore. Adana stumbled backward. "No," she whispered. "No, you're not real." Michael tilted his head. Water streamed from his hair, trickling down his face. He smiled. "You left me," he murmured. Adana shook her head violently. I tried to save you." Michael took a step forward. "You let me go." She took another step back. Her foot hit water. She looked down. The carpet was soaked. The water was rising. No. It was already up to her knees. It wasn't possible. It wasn't possible. Her heart pounded. She turned back to Michael, but he was right in front of her now. His cold hands gripped her arms. Adana gasped, trying to wrench free, but his grip was like iron. His eyes locked onto hers. His lips parted, and water poured out. She screamed. The entire room plunged underwater. There was no warning. 1 second she was standing. The next she was sinking. Darkness surrounded her. The room was gone. The walls, the furniture, all of it swallowed by an endless black ocean. Her lungs burned. She kicked, thrashed, but hands grabbed her ankles, pulled her deeper. She fought. No, she wouldn't die here. A face appeared in the water. David. His mouth moved, but the words were swallowed by the sea. Then, another face. Michael. His expression wasn't angry anymore. He looked afraid, like he wanted to warn her. But it was too late. The water pressed in from all sides. Adana's vision blurred. Her lungs gave out. Then, everything went black. Silence. Stillness. Until a loud, gasping breath. Adana's eyes flew open. She was lying in bed. The hotel room was bright. Morning sunlight streamed in through the window. For a moment, just a moment, she thought it had been a dream. Then she noticed the carpet, still wet, the bathroom door, slightly open, and inside the mirror, fogged up, with 2 words written on it. See you soon. Adana's breath hitched. She turned to the side. The other half of the bed was empty. Michael's things, gone. As if he had never been there at all. The next guest to check into that hotel room wouldn't know what happened. They wouldn't see the footprints that never dried. They wouldn't hear the whispers at night. And they wouldn't understand why the bathroom door never stayed open. But if they listened closely, at exactly 2:47 a.m., they would hear it. The drip, because the water never forgets. And neither do the dead. The past never stays buried. The truth, no matter how deep you sink it, always finds a way back to the surface. And when it does, it's never kind to those who try to forget. If this story chilled you to the bone, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more true crime horror stories that will keep you up at night. And remember, some secrets are better left in the dark. But the question is, can you live with them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Would you have survived this nightmare? Or would the water have taken you too?